phenomena of the Australian inland. A health check of Australia's major commercial media companies suggests things are not well for just about all of them. Certainly all the free-to-air television networks are staggering under debt burdens of historic proportions, just as they try to confront an erosion of revenues from the internet revolution, pay TV, and a severe downturn in advertising due to the global financial crisis. And it's not just television, of course. Rupert Murdoch's News Limited and, to an even greater degree, Fairfax newspapers are also feeling the heat. And together with commercial broadcasters, there's been considerable impact on investors and proprietors. This raises the possibility that significant changes in ownership are likely in the Australian media sector, but forecasting the future is proving most difficult for industry analysts. Business editor Greg Hoy reports.
The Australian media mogul is pretty well dead.
Once upon a time in Australia, mere mention of the name Packer, Murdoch, Fairfax or Symes could strike reverence or fear into the hearts of the highest-ranking public officials.
Media's got a particular attraction because it's an exercise of power in the political sphere and influence, and seems to attract ego trippers.
So many a would-be mogul tried following the footsteps of the media dynasties. But like Everest, this path proved perilous.
Most of them had an ego, where you take the O'Reillys, the Conrad Blacks, the Lowies, Christopher Skase and Alan Bond. You can take a whole crew of them, and a lot of them failed in the 1992 recession.
And today, history is repeating. Across the media landscape, the investment casualties are mounting.
To me, it seems like a rerun of what happened in the late 80s when the entrepreneurs bought up the networks, mostly with debt, and they all went belly up, and they were later refloated or repurchased by other parties and ultimately refloated on the stock market. So I suspect you could have a similar outcome this time round, but there's no equity value left in those vehicles.
Behind the glamour, the galaxy of stars, the promotions. All is not well in Australia's commercial television land. Despite revenues of $4 billion a year, the threat of insolvency looms large over the industry.
The only thing that is crippling it is the leverage, is the debt that the new crazy shareholders took on back in 2007 in both the 7 and 9 networks. That's what's going to kill the networks, not the businesses themselves. They're very sound.
Global private equity group CVC was to James Packer what Alan Bond was to his father, paying PBL Media a bonanza $5 billion to now control 99% of its TV, magazine and online interests, but Nine is now desperately trying to service its debt.
$4 or maybe more $billion worth of debt. They've stopped disclosing exactly how much. And again, in terms of earnings, you're looking at that having decreased to closer to 400 million.
This huge debt burden on the company is incurring an interest payment that's like $1 million a day. So, over $400 million a year. A television network cannot carry that sort of debt.
Particularly in a global downturn, and as the relentless rise of the internet erodes television's traditional audience. 26-year-old David McDonald tells how TV habits are fast changing for his Generation Y.
It's just been more convenient in plenty of ways to download content off the net. I think one of the most popular ones that people like to download is whole television series, where people like to watch a series from beginning to end, not like the way that television programs tend to be where you'd miss an episode week to week.
Bravely, James Packer gambled much of the profits from his sale of Nine on casino businesses in Macau and Las Vegas. But alas, fortune does not always favour the brave.
He's lost his media assets that were cash flow positive, were a great asset base. He's gone into the casino business, which is struggling. It's a very competitive market all around the world. There's too much supply. I think life is going to be very tough for James Packer in the future.
Next, Network 10, number one in its target market of 16 to 39-year-olds, but its Canadian parent, CanWest, controlling 57% of 10's stock, is also in great difficulty, desperately trying to sell assets, saddling 10 with heavy debts.
For 10, that translates into a parent that would like to see a dividend payment as much as possible, versus its own bankers down here that would like to see repayment of their debt. Now, as that falls through to 10's earnings, a fairly dire situation, I think, for the network to be in.
Another sad story is told at Channel 7. Here, Kerry Stokes found his Alan Bond in New York private equity's Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, which paid $3.2 billion for 53% of Seven's TV, magazines and online businesses.
There won't be sufficient earnings to make that company work, to repay the debt in principal terms before it has to be refinanced.
So could Kerry Stokes regain control? Well, not everything Mr Stokes has touched of late has turned to gold.
In the last half, Seven had $400 million of mark-to-market write-downs from their investments in the share markets.
For him to buy newspapers like West Australian Newspapers has been a financial disaster for Seven Network shareholders, but the share price is more than half on his average price he purchased that.
You've got a situation where we believe that they've invested some $500 million in Telstra over the last year. And as Telstra shares have fallen a lot, they must be down a couple of hundred million on the Telstra investment.
Speculation persists. Kerry Stokes may now be in the hunt for the heavily indebted Fairfax Group, which is also wounded and weakened, bleeding readers and advertising revenues, once known as rivers of gold, to the internet. Indeed, the relatively recent merger of Fairfax with Rural Press has hardly been a bonanza for the last media player left in the once mighty Fairfax newspaper dynasty, John B. Fairfax.
Certainly there's been significant destruction, I should say, in wealth.
He bought back the family farm, and he's seen the value of that farm be greatly reduced, combined with what he had to borrow to do that, has put financial pressures on himself. I'm sure this is not how he would have liked to have seen the great Fairfax empire end up.
So, with a strong sense of déjà vu, many of Australia's most prized media assets are now expected to change hands. What's harder to predict is where the new buyers will come from this time. Some think the biggest mogul of them all, Rupert Murdoch, would be rubbing his hands together with vulturistic glee, awaiting inevitable bargains. Others aren't convinced. After all, the insatiable Mr Murdoch isn't getting any younger. He's a little preoccupied with falling revenues in the news outlets he already owns globally, and has expressed uncertainty as to exactly where the next commercial opportunities will lie.
If there was to be forced sales, News are certainly in a position to be a buyer. Clearly they control newspapers in each major market, so as an acquisition, it is only free-to-air television, or perhaps a greater stake in Foxtel, that is more likely, I think, to be enacted by them.
The Packers are out; they're finished. Murdoch is under severe threat in News Corporation around the world, and he's coming to the end of his life. So News Corp will be a different company in 5 and 10 years' time. The true survivor of this will be Kerry Stokes, because I can't see him ever wanting to exit Seven, and for that matter, I can see him increasing his shareholding in the future in the Seven network.
Business editor Greg